Welcome to Think for Yourself Radio, a minimalist podcast exploring fringe concepts in health and consciousness from a biohacking perspective. Today, in this episode, we will be exploring the holographic fractal theory and how this relates to antibiotics, probiotics, and your microbiome. In the event that you're not familiar with the concept of the holographic fractal theory, I'll give you a brief synopsis, and I'll also give you some background information on myself to tell you why this is such an important subject for me, and share with you my subjective experience with this. The holographic universe was a theory pioneered by theoretical and astrophysicists in the 1990s, and it basically suggests that everything in the entire known universe may in fact be a gigantic hologram. And since holograms are fractal in nature, I also added fractal into the title, and I think it'll help me create a picture a little later on. So the truth is that this isn't exactly a new concept or a foreign theory. Ancient civilizations have long professed principles such as above, so below, as within, so without, and the macrocosm and the microcosm. An entire esoteric philosophies have been born around these concepts, sometimes even disguised in metaphor, like the ancient practice of alchemy. Well, when I was a little girl, this concept seemed like a no-brainer to me. I remember as a little girl, being out in nature, having ideas similar to these. I grew up in an atheist home, but I was always curious to see if there was any actual evidence that would suggest that an underlying universal intelligence existed, even as a little girl. I spent a lot of time alone outside, deep in nature. There's photos of me as a 5-year-old on the third sandbar at the ocean, all alone, just chilling with the birds and the fish. And I just spent all my time reading and alone in nature mostly. But even then, I had the makings of a fantastical Piscean dreamer, coupled with this fiercely data-driven, evidence-based seeker. So I distinctively remember thinking to myself while watching bugs, pondering the concept of fractals, even though at the time I didn't know that it was the concept of fractals. I innocently thought I bet if you zoomed in as far as you could go with a microscope, you'd see tiny little versions of people with these little bugs having a world of their own, just like ours. And I also thought that if you zoomed out as far as you could, that we were bugs to some gigantic people that we couldn't see. So that's kind of an interesting concept for an 8-year-old. And at the time, human was the best thing I could come up with to represent consciousness. Interestingly, my beliefs have landed pretty close to the same ones that I discovered by myself as a child, maybe a little bit more refined. But you can bet how absolutely shocked and elated I was as a 22-year-old when I was attending University of Oregon and I came across some scientific publications describing the theory of the holographic universe. So even now, I feel more inclined to go with my very adolescent and simplified views of my 8-year-old child simply because that was a legitimate original thought. I could not have come up with that from an external source. Since I grew up on a really tiny, poor little island, nobody was really educated. The island was primarily Catholic, and I remember getting in trouble at school for bringing up Darwin's theory of evolution, and the teachers looked at me like I was like a blasphemous demon. And it couldn't have come from my staunchly atheist father. I'm sure he absolutely influenced it, but even though he was a super deep thinker and an intellectual, and I attribute his obsession with the scientific method to, contribute a lot to who I am today. But he was born in the 1920s, 1922 to be exact, and he participated in exactly 0% of any type of New Age dogma. So what does all this have to do with our microbiome? The biohackers must know. So if we follow the wisdom from the ancients and entertain for just a moment